Hello and welcome to the Finance Quarter. I'm Andrew Robertson. Today on the program, the plight of women in business. While doors in most walks of life have opened up for women over the last 40 years or so, in the big end of town it's still very much a boys' club. The latest census of women in leadership shows the glass ceiling is still as firmly in place as it ever was. Despite all the recent talk of helping women to the top, the boardroom is still very much a male club. At the end of April, women had just 123 out of nearly 1,500 board seats at ASX 200 companies. It's up slightly in percentage terms, but in 2008 there were 125 female directors. Women chaired just 5 ASX 200 companies and held 6 CEO positions. The percentage of companies with no female directors had gone up from 51% to 54%, while the percentage of women in line management roles considered essential for rising to the top remains at just over 4%.
That not much has changed in corporate Australia in the last, it's close to 10 years now, at that very senior level. And you can see it manifested in the figures despite a lot of platitudes from senior executives and CEOs of the companies and indeed board directors.
And I think one of the issues is that some of the experience that a number of women have had has not necessarily been valued properly.
ANZ has one woman on its board. The head of the Australian arm of global financial services firm AMBAC believes for situations like that to improve, those on the inside need to do more for those trying to climb the corporate ladder.
One of the issues here is networks. It's difficult to break into the networks to actually get on, say, a board or into senior management. But by people who serve as mentors saying, let me pick up the phone and call somebody that you need to meet to get into that next role is very important.
With diversity soon to be enshrined in the ASX listing rules, women are hoping the next Women in Leadership census in 2012 will reflect a very different corporate culture. Well, since that Women in Leadership census was taken back in April, the number of female directors has risen to 10%, a step in the right direction, but still an embarrassment. So what needs to happen to get women up the corporate ladder and into the boardroom in large numbers? Not surprisingly, it's an issue on which women have strong views, and 2 women with strong views are sitting behind me. Let's go and meet them. Business consultant Jennifer Dallitz and executive search consultant Carol Lewis, welcome to the Finance Quarter. When you look at the numbers in that latest census of women in leadership, what do you think, Jen?
Nothing much has changed. It's interesting to me that since the survey began in 2002 in Australia, we've moved from, 8.2% of women on boards to 8.4%. Disappointing.
Carol?
I don't know that the figures actually reflect the work that's going on behind where those figures are aiming to be, but on the merit of their own, of what's printed, they're very disappointing.
Why do you think the figures are as they are?
I think there's a couple of reasons, and I certainly think that the GFC gave us a hole in our progress of where we were going with creating more opportunity for women in the workforce and more senior women. So I think that sort of was a bit of a hole in the program, but it was also a good hole because it gave us time to reflect on what needs to be done and some of the programs that we need to put in place.
Does it surprise you that the number of companies without one woman on the board has actually gone up in the last 2 years?
Yeah, absolutely.
That is probably a very big surprise, given that the fact there's been such a lot of talk and rhetoric about how this should be addressed, and given that there's now some very good examples of where women are on boards, where companies are really enjoying that diversity conversation there and the challenge that it brings to the workforce and the board, making people address issues, the diversity of comment, etc., that brings alive some new conversations in the boardroom that gets delivered through the organisations.
Carol, looking at the results of this census, is it too simplistic to just look at these figures and say the big end of town is a boys' club and the boys just want to keep it that way?
I don't think that's actually right. I think that there are some absolute examples of where we're seeing some real changes in that attitude and that thinking. I was at a presentation the other day that Michael Ulmer was speaking at. Michael Ulmer is the Deputy Chief of NAB and also in their Diversity Council, amongst other boards. And he was saying how much he's enjoyed the change of having women on boards, and he really embraces the conversations that bring around the diversity issues. So he was very much in favour of what the changes have bring about and the changes that filter down through the organisation following the appointment of women. So I think there's been he disagrees very much with the sentiment that you have to have earned your stripes and you have to be a CEO before you've got valuable contribution to make in that area there. He made the point that how many men have got the ability to have been a CEO as well. So I think that myth is changing as we're seeing a changing of the guard of that old school of directors moving through, and we will see a lot more organisations. I'm personally, as a headhunter, being asked for making sure that there's women going through the flow of being onto their nominations committees for the next round of board selections. So hopefully these EOWA figures we'll see that reflected in their next release in 2 years' time.
Jen, what do you think? Is it a boys' club?
Look, it still is a boys' club. Are there mechanisms in place to try and change that? Yes. However, I don't think we can say it's not a boys' club until we have a situation where this is a key strategic issue for all board directors. And let's not forget that 90% of those people are men. If it wasn't a boys' club anymore, we wouldn't have 54% of ASX 200 companies without any women on the board. I mean, if they really truly were genuinely concerned and staying awake at night about how do we get more diversity onto our boards, I think these people are smart enough to have worked out how to do that.
So we've got, at the moment, we've got the Institute of Company Directors has a mentoring program, the Business Council of Australia has a mentoring program, we've got lots of individual companies very publicly saying we're trying to get more women up the ladder. Is it your sense, starting with you, Jen, is it your sense that there is a serious push on now, or is it just we've just got to keep the wolves at bay type platitudes?
I would say I think that it's a better time than ever to be a woman in business. I really think it's almost a perfect storm of a lot of circumstances coming together to make it the right time to be noticed if you're a skilled woman in business. And partly because these organisations now realise they do need to act on the public sentiment, which is very much that this resource has been underutilised for too long. So there is a lot of public sentiment saying these companies need to sort this stuff out. It's an efficiency issue, it's a productivity issue. We cannot continue to have a situation in Australia where we are educating over half of our university graduates are women and they're not making it through to the top. So what do? We say, well, let's not even bother educating them anymore. We're not going to give them the top jobs. I mean, we have to. That problem has to be solved, and I think organisations are responding with some really good initiatives.
ANZ Bank's only female director, Alison Watkins, told the ABC a couple of years ago that we really need boards and chairmen in particular to take risks if they're going to accelerate the pace of change. Do you agree with that? And firstly to you, Jen, just how radical does the solution have to be if this logjam is going to be broken?
Putting my change manager's hat on, I don't think the solution has to be very radical at all, but it needs to be different. I think it's better to be different than it is to be better. And I think that it doesn't have to be a big number. There are thousands of women out there ready and willing and able to go on boards if every company chairman made a decision that in the next 12, 18 months they would why not appoint an extra director to the board and make it a woman? Doesn't have to be difficult.
Do there need to be things like quotas?
I'd like to hear about what her definition of risk was, because I think that it doesn't need to have a risk. You just really need to go to market. We know there's lots of women out there that are very capable. They may not be doing as much self-promotion or may not be as visible as what men are, but there's a lot of very capable women there. So it really has to be about the organisation giving you the brief that says, or the headhunter or whoever it's going to be that's doing the search for your talent on a board. You really have to give a brief because there's lots of women out there.
Well, just finally, a question to both of you. This census will be taken again in 2012. What will the numbers need to look like in your minds for you to be thinking to yourself there's been good progress here? Carol?
Well, I think we've seen, even just in the last 12 months, within the last 12 months, we've seen some real movements to increase those numbers. So I think at least double isn't good enough, but double, I think they would easily be double just by seeing what we're seeing there. If people follow through with that and really get behind what they're saying they're doing, then I would expect to see that as a minimum we would be double those figures.
So 16% of women on boards. What about line managers? That was only 4%.
Well, line managers, I think we're already seeing that there's huge changes. Once again, going back to the Commonwealth Bank, they're putting in some very good programs there. They have a special program for their top 3 layers of women, so for the top 3 layers of executives to go through talent management, and they've appointed some absolutely outstanding candidates.
But they're one company.
They're one organisation, but also too that then that sets a bar and it sets a competitive environment there where other organisations, and I'm seeing that in throughout the financial services community, which 30 years ago there wasn't 1% of women, let alone what we're seeing today. So they've come from a very low base to being. They've got a lot more women coming through the ranks. We're seeing a lot more people there in their 40s, 50s that are still back in the market.
Jen?
We're going to have an argument.
Sorry to cut you off. We are running out of time. In your mind, what numbers will we be looking for in 2 years to think?
Yeah, it needs to be double. So it needs to be 16% within 2 years to show that companies are really serious about this. I am concerned about the line management pipeline. There's a big difference between middle management, senior management and executive level roles for women, and so that also needs to follow a similar trend so that we see that organisations are actually getting the people within their business to look more like our communities. So the decision making within businesses, within the day-to-day stuff that goes on in organisations is just as important to me as what happens at the boardroom table.
Lots to think about there. Business consultant Jennifer Dallitz and executive search consultant Carol Lewis, thank you both for joining us on the Finance Quarter.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
Well, as Jennifer Dallitz and Carol Lewis have just made clear, the pressure is really on the big end of town to get its act together before the next census of women in leadership is taken in 2012. Now, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the program or any questions you'd like us to answer or suggestions for topics we can cover. Our email address is thefinancequarter@your.abc.net.au. And if you'd like to see any part of that interview with Carol Lewis or Jennifer Dallitz again, you can find it on the ABC News website. Just go to the business page and click on the Finance Quarter icon. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Finance Quarter.